All right, well, here's what we're going to do. First of all, Jerry introduced me. I'm Mark Patterson. I'm pastor at Community Presbyterian Church in Ventura. And I'm just going to go down the row here and let this august panel, and Jerry mentioned that there are 13 members. This is the group. We figured it would be a little overwhelming, not to mention just plain wouldn't fit to have all 13 of us. So others might pop up, but this is the group that's agreed to do the presentation and move through the things. So Mickey, we'll just have them introduce themselves as we go down the line, and we'll set the course.
My name is Mickey O'Donnell. I'm the Director of Children and Family Ministries at Norotan Presbyterian Church in Darien, Connecticut. Yes, I got out a day early before the snow. And our church is PCUSA, and I am a member of the fellowship.
I'm Tim McConnell, pastor of Eastminster Presbyterian Church in Marietta, Georgia, and we are an eco-church.
I'm Barry Gray. I'm pastor at White Clay Creek Presbyterian Church in Newark, Delaware, and we are an eco-church.
I'm Mike Shirey. I'm the associate pastor at Northminster Presbyterian Church in Peoria, Illinois. We have been an eco-church since October of 2013.
Hi, Dave Hunsicker. I'm a doctoral candidate in systematic theology at Fuller Seminary. I'm a candidate for ordination in the Holston Presbytery, which is in East Tennessee. And I currently worship at First Presbyterian Church of Hollywood, which is a fellowship church.
I'm Greg Wagenfear, the transitional pastor at the United Presbyterian Church in Canyon City, Colorado. I've been there just a short time after finishing my doctoral work in England. And we're an eco-church.
All right. Thank you, team. Now, as far as direction, I want to voice that when Jerry set this idea up, it's really good in one sense because it allows deepening the conversations that we've all been having. It allows further conversation and coalescing. And I think that was his idea, coalescing of the ideas, trying to pull them into a center so we can have a little clearer direction of moving forward for the task force. But he also had another agenda in all this, and I don't know if you all know this, but it was clearly stated that when we open the mics up wide open and want to hear from you, there's the possibility that complaints will come forward, and he wanted me to receive them instead of him. And so I wanted to take a moment before we start to give you all of Jerry's contact information. All right, here's what we're going to do. Brief introduction, very brief. And then we're going to look at several different areas. Once we get into the meat of it, the first area, Mickey's going to start off, and we want to cover, make sure you understand and we understand that we've heard you. It's very important that we don't leave this place with our own ideas and agendas and start thinking about the future without any real contact with what you've set before us. And we've had a lot of good conversation. We want to look at that again and make sure we've got it together. Next, again, this is an area that we've covered in depth and together, but just the importance of theology in the life of the church. We've talked a lot about the idea and the sense, sometimes the perception in our churches, maybe even among people that we work with and live with, that theology is a strange appendix in the church. It's not necessary to any real Christian life or godly living or ethics. It's just a weird hobby for those who are bent in that direction and largely irrelevant. And I hope what you've heard in this time is that it's really not. It's a really important part of the life of the church. And we're going to look at that a little bit and talk about that a little bit. And then as we move into the last two sessions, these are going to be much more focused on hearing from you. We'll present a little bit, give some ideas, but we want to hear from you in these last two. We want to hear about best practices. We use that a lot on the eco side, and it's not just the eco side, the fellowship side as well. We want to talk about being the best church that we can, and one of the best ways to do that is learn from each other. And when we think about theology, it's hard to do theology in the local church for a lot of reasons. And we want to think for a few minutes together, what can we do when we leave here and instantly put some practices into effect this Sunday, literally this Sunday, to start doing things. And the ideas on this would be looking at what you all have done, what we've done, some of the things we've done to help our churches grow theologically. And the hope is that we would all maybe have some ideas, 4 ideas, 5 ideas, 6 ideas that we hear from one another that we can walk out and start implementing in our church, whatever else might come and grow from these discussions. And finally, we want to end with looking at long-range hopes and goals for the theological task force. What are they going to be doing? What's the next project? What do we need to set ourselves to in priority? And let it be said, none of us, or maybe I think 2 of them are on the theological, or in theory coming on the theological task force, but none of us have been on it. And so that will be something that will be forwarded on and pondered together and banged around. Even this afternoon, a little bit, we're going to start that conversation and such. So hopefully that's very clear. That's the introduction and plan. I'm going to turn it over to Mickey. What have we learned? What have we heard?
Well, hopefully I'll be able to share what we think we've heard everyone saying, because it'd be very important for us not to just sort of assume we should go forward without reviewing. So here's a few of the things that I've jotted down and have heard from others as well. That I think that in our conversation in the plenary sessions, we agree that it would be stupid not to draw upon the wisdom of our history. I think we agree there. Because we know that we lose our soul when we lose our historical contexts and our history. We also are a little bit hesitant about being too quick to sort of like run off and write a whole new set of confessions. We don't want to be, over anxious about that. Someone suggested that maybe 9 that we do have seem like a lot. And the question then is also that we realize that context matters. Our confessions that we hold dearly to us now were developed when Christendom ruled the culture. And we're now entering a new creedal age where we're not even postmodern anymore, we're a post-Christian world. And so how will this inform what and how we teach? That's a question that's before us. I'm not offering any answers, I'm just saying here's what we've heard about the questions. People no longer think historically. And so they think more through story and song and poetry. And so they need to see anything they are taught that makes a real connection to their life. So since the church is no longer the conduit of control in this country's culture, how do we do the teaching that we need to do? What are the methodologies? How do we empower our elders? That seems to keep coming up over and over again. They're already here, they're already nominated, they're already leading in our sessions, but they don't even have the appropriate biblical knowledge, let alone theology, to begin with. So we will need to help. We'll need help with this, and I think that's what we've heard. We need the task force to help. We also need the grassroots ideas of how can we change some of our methodology. We do need to require some kind of accountability group for pastors and for those of us who are together either as the fellowship or in ECO, and that will be a challenge. It was clear that church education needs to change. The reason why the creeds and the confessions have been neglected materials over the years is probably because our teachers haven't had the opportunity to do it with anything other than sort of a dry methodology. And so that being what it is, then the elders, we ask them to do all the teaching, but they don't even have the gift of teaching. So we have this question of what do we do to do the teaching that needs to be done via contemporary methodologies across the age span, so that we can produce a hunger for learning. So how do we get people to see that theology is life, and it's life-giving, and it's not dry? So what's the relationship between the scriptures and the confessions? And sometimes just a little textbook is not enough. We need really hands-on methodologies for how we can do that. We need a little help with that. Do we have the luxury of having our rulers actually do all the teaching when maybe they don't have the gift? And how do the apostolic gifts fit in with how we unleash and train leaders within the church? They may not all be elders, but we have the apostolic gifts to look at. There was another question that I heard, and that is, are we considering adding the French confession? And has anybody actually used the guide for this, and has it been effective? That was a question that was on the floor. I'd love to know that. The nuts and bolts about how things are being taught and how is our theology is informing our practices. This should be on the agenda for dialogical deliberations in our sessions, in our presbyteries, in our church team meetings. So, but we also are needing a little bit of guidance from the higher ups with some deadlines. I think we heard that it's the grassroots movements is a little bit scary if we're all just running around grassrooting. We still need to have some guidance and some boundaries that are put around it, as well as the deadlines. And it's the hope for us that the fellowship and ECO continue to work together on these methodologies and support one another in them. So that's what I heard, and that's what I think we heard.
Does anyone else on the panel want to add to that? Anything else that you heard in your groups that were voiced? Because I had a lot of discussion. Anybody else, team? Want to add anything? You did a great job.
Thank you.
All right. And we're not going to be so much open-mic'd on this one because we've been discussing these things, and pretty much the next one as well. The next discussion, again, is just to re-emphasize what Mickey just touched on in some ways, the importance of theology in the life of the church. And again, we often fall into the error, and I think it's a profound error to see theology as mere academic reflection that has little to do with the real life, personal real life, or the real life of the church. And one of the things that's important to understand is that theology is at the heart of our life together. It's at the heart of our mission together. One of my professors, one of my mentors really, when I went to Whitworth College, Dale Bruner, he used to say, theology is the complex science that keeps the gospel from becoming complex. And the reality of the fact of the matter is the gospel is very simple. I mean, it needs to be kept simple. We need to be able to tell first graders the gospel, and they get it. And it is tellable to that level. They can get it. And we need to be able to tell every age that. And you know the story, that the human race was created to know God. We fell from that, and He is relentlessly, lovingly, mercifully sought after us to restore the relationship, and He has given us Jesus to pull it off. You could phrase it in different ways, but the gospel's simple. But the problem is errors sneak in, and bad thoughts, bad interpretations, and theology is a complex science. We may wish that it weren't so. We might say, why can't we just have the simple faith? But there's never been just a simple faith. Even the earliest church had to wrestle with the deepest of issues and controversies. And when we talk about Jesus as Lord and the importance of Jesus, well, in what sense is He human? In what sense is He God? How do the two natures fit together? It's complex. The gospel is simple, but science or theology is the complex science that keeps the gospel from becoming complex. And one other thing along that theme is one of my heroes, Otto Weber, in his Foundations of Dogmatics. He has a line that's very similar to Dale Bruner's mantra, and he said, Christian dogma is necessary to keep the living faith from becoming Christianity. What we're about is a living faith. Doctrine, the correct understanding of the living faith, keeps it from becoming a ritual and religion, and keeps it alive and dynamic and fresh and addressing the situation. Those are just my quick thoughts. I'm going to turn it over to Tim and Barry and to just reflect a little bit more from what we've heard and the importance of theology in the daily life of the church. Tim.
Thank you, Mark. That's what we heard in our small group. I was grateful to be given the very best small group of the conference, which was number 11. Thank you, Jerry, for that. And we talked about that, how theology is not just a matter of self-gratification, of self-stimulation for people that are gifted to sort of run in those circles. Theology is part and parcel of the life of the church. Our theology is a piece with our ability to proclaim the gospel in our times and not to attenuate our gospel message, as Mateen eloquently put it earlier today. So the elders that I talked with, we were from ECO, PCUSA, and Fellowship Engagement, and they were all encouraged by the idea that part of being an elder is to attend to the theology of the church, to attend to the confessional heritage of the church. And they were encouraged by that. They thought that was a gift. You see, our confessional heritage and our theology is not only a dutiful responsibility. It is that, and we've heard that. It's also a gift. Confession in the church is the activity of the church receiving the gospel. Receiving the gospel in their time, in their context, and proclaiming the gospel and bearing witness to what has been received from above. And when we confess properly, we confess in a way that is contiguous with the church as it has received and confessed the gospel in the past. And so confession, we talked about, is not just, confession is an activity. And as elders, this isn't just us reciting some mantra. It's an activity of confessing what we believe. And that we need to learn how to do that again by engaging the confessional documents that we have that speak to us from the history of the church and bring those voices into our contemporary church. we believe that we're still bound to those voices. They're part of our church as much as we are. So this is an event, not an activity, and it's a joy to be re-engaged with that as elders of the church. Why is theology important in the life of the church? Protestantism is 51% non-denominational. Now, non-denominational leaders will step forward and say very proudly that they believe that their churches are growing quickly because they are not encumbered by a train of theology. And then we'll watch how these churches falter and struggle. We don't believe that. We believe that our theological heritage is a gift to be reapplied and reapplied, but that if we can attend to it and if we can confess as an activity today, as confession has happened in the life of the church in the past, that we will benefit from that, and our proclamation of the gospel today will benefit from that, and will have deeper foundations. I'm reminded of the saying by J.I. Packer, bad theology hurts people. This isn't an irrelevant affair. Bad theology hurts people. As I mentioned in my small group, if I were the deceiver, if I were Satan, and I wanted to severely hobble the Christian church, one of the first things I would try to convince the leaders is that they can't trust the generations that have gone before them. And so they need to disconnect from any heritage and from any learned lessons of the generations of the past. Because if I could just get them to do that, then I could pull out the old playbook and just start on page 1. Right again, and start attacking these churches. So our heritage is very important to us. It's a gift. It's something that isn't just a responsibility and a burden. It's something that releases us to be more effective in the proclamation of the gospel tomorrow than we were today, if we'll engage with our theological heritage in the life of the church.
Well, when this group first got together, when we got here, we introduced ourselves to one another. And one of the things that impressed me is Michael introduced himself to the group as the theologian in residence. I love that. That just, I said, yeah. The reality is each one of us who pastor are called to be the theologian in residence in our churches. Which means that we have a theological job to do. To do that job, we can't just be reading the latest book that comes out with the newest idea for how to reach the next generation. If we do that, we've lost everything that the church has gained throughout history. We have got to engage with the church down through the centuries of which we are a part. And the confessions are one of the incredible ways to do that. Now, when I do exegesis, both for sermons and for Bible studies and even for trying to figure out sometimes how to counsel people, I consult commentaries to check out if my thinking is going along in a good way. I look at some books that I've read to make sure, but I also look at the confessions and the creeds of the church. Is there something there that's going to help me to make the point that needs to be made? I want to tell you a story. About 8 years ago, I was counseling with a young couple who was really struggling with their marriage, and about 20 minutes into our session together, I said to them, one of the main problems that you have is that you have no foundation in your life for how you are living your life together. And at that point, I offered them, if you will gather some of your friends, I will come to your house once a week, and we're going to do Bible study, and I will lay a foundation. And they took that challenge. Now, as I was praying and asking God what I should do, I really felt God said, teach them the Heidelberg Catechism. And I said, are you kidding me? What's that about? But it was really strong on my heart. And so I got to the first meeting and I said, here's what God has laid on my heart. I'm going to teach you the Heidelberg Catechism. And they said, are you kidding me? I said, my very reaction to God. But I'll tell you what, let's try it for 3 weeks. If it doesn't work, we'll go on to something else. We spent a year and a half on the Heidelberg Catechism in Bible study, looking at the scriptures, looking at the questions and answers, and walking through it. 4 months after we started this study, our host came to me, and she said, I got to tell you what happened today. I have a very good friend who is into Eastern religions, and every time I have ever talked to him, I don't know what to tell him. He always comes out on top on the discussions. She said, today I talked with him again, and I had an answer to give him, and he did not know what to say. We never talked about Eastern religions. We never talked about anything. We taught what the Bible says through the catechism, and she became strong, and the others became strong. We need to not forget the wisdom of the past. That is our heritage. Use it in our everyday living, in our everyday ministry. Use them as a devotional for yourself. Feed on them. When was the last time you opened a book of confessions and looked at it? Or actually read them? There is gold there. And it will minister to your soul. It will lift you up, it will make you strong, and it will make you able to help your church become strong.
Yeah, Brian, want to add something? Tim?
One of the things as looking at that, on my flight down here from Seattle, I was sitting and reading Alistair McGrath's book, Faith and Creeds, a guide for study and devotion. It's really a good, very simple read, but really straightforward. And I think part of theology not only is about our own sense of identity and belonging to a tradition, but the missional aspect of it. I think you're raising it right there. Sitting next to me, a woman was sitting next to me, and she looked and she says, that looks like a very interesting book. I was on the first page, it said life is a journey. And she had no idea what she was recommending at the point, and I said, I see you got quite a fat book there too. What are you reading? And she said, The Art of Magic History and Art. And I said, what do you do? She said, I flew from Portland. I'm flying down for a conference in San Diego. I said, well, so am I. And I said, what conference are you going to? And she said, I'm going to a Wiccan conference. And we got into this huge... And we got into this huge conversation around theology. So theology can't simply be an internal conversation. And particularly in the new opportunity we have, I think that mission helps us clarify, again, our theology, that we don't do theology in this vacuum, but the whole idea is our theology has to also speak into the culture. Even the great creeds and confessions, again, spoke not just to the church internally, but outward, that was transformational, cultural. And apart from that, I think we will miss an opportunity doing theology together if it's not a missional theology that not only helps us with our own sense of identity and conviction, but likewise being able to speak to a Wiccan and have a theological conversation, because in the end of the day, that Wiccan has as much theology going as we as Christians do. And in this culture, we're going to have to be able to engage that in everyday life. She just happened to pick a pastor who has a PhD in theology to sit next to that day, but it could be you. It could be one of your parishioners. And how are they going to be equipped to theologically speak to a person like that sitting next to them at the airplane or at Starbucks?
Yeah, and the other is, we'll roll on to the next one final thing. I have in my town, maybe a lot of you do, all of us have a ministerial group, a group of pastors. We have a fantastic group. I'm the only mainline, so to speak. Most are non-denominational sort, and great group. But one day we met for lunch, and I said, how's it going? I said, oh, we had a great night last night. We had Ash Wednesday. And it was great. And two of the guys especially said, what's Ash Wednesday? And I said, well, it's when we begin the journey to Easter. And what we want to do in our church, we believe that Easter, Holy Week, is the center of the whole thing. And we want people to land in that week and get as much out of it as they can, to understand why Jesus died and why we need him and what the resurrection means to bring new life. And so we work really hard to prepare for Holy Week. And Ash Wednesday's the kickoff. And I said, here's what we did, and explained our service, which was really fun. And he goes, that is so cool. Did you guys invent that? And I said, we did. We did it. I did it the first year that I came, and we actually got a copyright on it. And he goes, really? He said, could we use it? And I said, yeah, I'll give you the stuff. We'll let you do it for free. We usually give it out. Anybody that wants to do an Ash Wednesday service has to pay us a fee, but I'm happy to give it to you guys for free. So the weird thing is, what we take for granted with a tradition, there are traditions, Christian traditions, good Christian traditions, that have no sense of roots. And I want to propose, and I think my friends up here do as well, that there's a depth and a life, a missional hope and power that these traditions give us. Theological traditions, practical traditions, they give us wisdom, they give us direction, they give us insight. They're a real gift. All right, do you want to say something, Greg? I see you leaning. Are you good on this? Are we ready to move on, or you want to? All right, we're good. All right, now we're going to turn it, we're going to present just a little bit as we have, but we want to get more feedback from you all on this, and this is turning to the idea of best practices. What we learn from each other. What are you doing? We've heard, in my group, I heard, theology is hard to teach in a practical daily setting. We voiced a lot of different ways in my circle of why that was the case. For one thing, when we go to seminary, we get a lot of classes, early church history and language and theological concepts. And so it's easier to talk about this because we understand what Nicaea means. When somebody says, well, that's not the principles of Nicaea, and we know what that means instantly. The congregation doesn't understand what that means. It's foggy, it's fuzzy. You turn to your elders and say, we're gonna study Barmen Declaration, and they have no clue sometimes what that even means, or why would we do that? What does that have to do with us? And it's hard, and one in our group mentions he had a really good congregation, but mostly blue collar, and they were caring, good Christians, but they were more concerned with, what do I need to do? I just need 5 things to have a better marriage, and 3 things to raise my kids, and I don't really care about the hypostasis or the hypostatic union. What does that got to do with life? And so teaching theology and living theology can be hard. And so one of the things that we can do to help overcome the hurdle, because it is a hurdle in all our churches, is what are we doing to train our people? There's subtle little ways, there's outward ways. One thing in my church we did that I thought was very helpful is we did a series once, I can't remember how long, 12 weeks maybe, on the Nicene Creed. And and this sounds bad, but hopefully it'll sound redemptive, that instead of the scriptures being the center, I preached on the Nicene Creed. I combined it with scripture. So the first Sunday was, I believe in God the Father Almighty, and took, I think, a couple Psalms, if I recall, talking about the sovereignty of God, the absolute majesty and sovereignty of God. And then the next week, the maker of heaven and earth. And we went to Genesis and a couple other passages, and we looked, what does it mean to have? But for 8 weeks, we just talked about the Nicene Creed. And I would work with Ken, so we do some fun things, like on Sunday morning, we might do an all-church adult ed class where we talk about the Nicene Creed, and we take questions back and forth, and we don't overwhelm their lack of understanding. We feed them with the truth and as best we can. We've done it with the French Confession. We had gatherings together and discussed the French Confession. We've done it with Bonhoeffer, a couple things. Kent and I doing those together on Bonhoeffer and discussing not just his life. You inspire people with his life, but then talk about his theology. When people are inspired about a person's life, they're more interested to talk about that person's deep ideas rather than just dropping them. So those are some ideas that we've done. Anybody on the panel want to speak to that? Greg?
Yeah, and that kind of goes into what I was going to say. In my church, there's it's a much older congregation, and most of them are disappointed with the fact that their kids don't go to church. These are grandparents, great-grandparents, and some of them are bringing their great-grandchildren to church, but their own families didn't continue. And, the tradition didn't get carried on. And as you were saying, what's so important is, and I keep trying to raise it again, that as we go through the Bible, we find the importance of the family, especially in the Old Testament, that how is the next generation going to know the law of God? Well, because they're going to talk about it all the time. It's going to be everywhere surrounding them, on their doorposts and all that. We don't do that. Our faith has been made ancillary to our lives rather than the central defining part of our identity. And another thing we talked about a lot is in that kind of church with such a biblical illiteracy, how do we even begin to approach talking about creeds and confessions, something that seems rather secondary to just getting them to know, where the book of Psalms is, or how to interpret different genres or something. But as I was thinking about that, and as I was going through, well, how do I get these people to understand the Bible to begin with? I said, well, I'll preach through it, preach the story. That's a big thing everyone's into right now, is the story of the Bible. But, often we forget that in going through that, we think, you're taught in homiletics that you need to bridge the hermeneutical gap between then and now. Well, often I think we make a hermeneutical jump, as though it's like, here's a principle of this text, here's a principle of what it means, and preaching can be very principle-based. Instead of that, if we can rehistoricize it, make it a story again, and say, not necessarily say, oh, the people said this in this confession, but build the bridge of how do we apply this text. You could take a great, something from Romans, for example. Instead of just saying, here's what this means, we can build the bridge through a sermon to get them to where we want them to be. In telling the story of the Bible, we need to tell the story of the later tradition as well, because we are the recipients of a family story. And if we want our children to continue our family, literal and spiritual children, then we need to tell that story. And it doesn't have to be factual, but fact-based and boring. It can be a story. And as you were saying, when like you were saying about Bonhoeffer, if you get to know their lives, then you get interested in what they talked about. And the same thing would be true of the confessions. Of course, no one's interested in them because they don't know what was happening. Most people know nothing about the Reformation anyway. So can we tell those stories, and then they'll get interested in what the confessions say. And to build that interest, we have to build that into preaching. And so as we preach through the Bible, as we preach certain stories, why not build that bridge for them and make it readily apparent you might call it the reception history of a story. And I do this all the time with say, what does the image of God mean? I think it's so great for us to think about a massive theological concept, the image of God. How do, most people interpret it in a certain way, and it's often a very self-justificatory way, God's just like me, and so I'm perfect because I'm this way and God's that way. But taking them through that process also helps us not make God in our image, because we do get that historic perspective of other people critiquing that kind of thing. Just one little further example. I was, thinking in Scripture, one of the popular things now is to talk about, the God of the universe, the creator of all things, loves you so much. Well, that's true. Let's, in Scripture, it's almost always referring to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not the creator of the universe. And maybe that's a significant point, that we expect the creator of the universe to show up in the room unannounced and convert everybody in some great experience, rather than working through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, down through the ages, through us, to instill that faith in new generations.
Great. Thanks, Greg. How about you? We'd love to hear just briefly. It doesn't have to be long or anything. In fact, I think people would appreciate if it's not. But if you were to say something like, where or when did you have the most powerful theological lesson? What has been an event that you've done that's brought the story of the church or the story of its faith to the people in a successful way? Or is there anything you can share with the body that we can take home? Yeah.
Well, now that you've phrased it that way, a personal story, I grew up in the Christian Reformed Church, and I'm glad to meet some other Dutch people here today. Thank you. And one of the things that we had to do when we made profession of faith was actually be held accountable for what we learned. And I see that as my sons went through, their profession of faith, it wasn't anything like the rigor I had to go through. And so I think in the church we shy away from the word accountability. I think now that I'm an elder, I should be held to a higher standard of accountability. I should have some pressure on me. Okay, people shouldn't just be nice to me. People should expect something of me, and I should be ashamed if I don't have the answers, and I should go seek them. So since you phrased it as, what happened to you, that's what happened to me. I was raised in a home and in a church where you did not go before the elders unprepared.
Wow.
You needed to know your stuff, or you were going to be embarrassed, and your whole family was going to be embarrassed because your mother and father were going to find out how badly you failed. So I think some of that's good, though. We've gotten too nice.
Yeah. Thank you. Very good. Any other ideas, things that you've done in your church? Yeah.
Very simply, we used Craig Barnes' material on the Heidelberg Catechism and preached through it for 6 or so weeks, and had an adult Sunday school class on it.
Good.
And it brought those questions. Why are we doing this?
Good.
What does this have to do? And so that was a good part of the discussion, and it was fruitful.
That's great. It's good to write down. Craig Barnes' resource on Heidelberg is very good. And if you're thinking like, I don't know how to begin preaching on any of the creeds, that kind of resource is really good. Yeah, Brian.
I was so grateful in my group to have someone who does children's ministry and bring that perspective to light. And my wife happens to do children's ministry. Our last trunk and treat we did at church, again, as people came and had fun, but one of the rooms was we had great saints from the cloud of witnesses in there, biblical characters. I had fun playing Martin Luther like there was no tomorrow. And you know what? Kids walked out of there, sitting there afterwards and getting out of costume and hearing kids who I knew had never heard the name before, saying, that Martin Luther was a character. That made my life worthwhile for that day. A simple thing which has been so robbed in our culture, but to be able, again, to share the story in a dramatic way, a fun way, and yet something that the children and their parents walking out of there who were unchurched, had no idea, had no church background. There's just some great ways, and I think we need to ask that question starting when our children, how are we raising, I think it's a great question, how do we raise children up, benchmarks for knowing and living into the faith, that we're really intentional about that. Not just kind of thinking it's going to happen, but being more intentional at using that, and I think telling the story. And that was just one way the church, it was a great way, and boy, people got into it. And it was just it was fun for me, and it was informative for people who came, and we'll keep doing it.
Great, thanks, Brian. Another way to phrase it, helpful things, what's the best book you've used to help lead your congregation deeper in a theological discussion or a sermon series? What's the best, most useful book, workbook? Anything? It doesn't have to be that if you got another idea.
Before they get off on that, one of the things, I want to say, as a pastor, you set the tone, really, in your congregation. If you are not excited about this stuff, they will not be excited about this stuff. If you are excited about this, if you love this stuff, if this is your meat and potatoes, your congregation will catch on too.
Yeah, good word.
Just add a bit to that. If there's no joy in your theology, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. You're doing it wrong. Amen.
And you need a theology therapist who can come in and the theology is doxological. It's a praise. It's an act of praise of our reception and our reaction to the revelation of God and Jesus Christ and what He's done for us. And the further down we can hang our full theology, we talked about the earliest confession, Jesus is Lord, in our small group, and how if you want to start simple, yes, start with that confession. But then what do you hang off of that? Who is Jesus? How is he Lord? And these things start to hang off. And the further down you can hang, joyfully hang your mobile, of theological exploration and theological articulation, the more inspired the people around you will be to want to see more of it themselves and to see how it hangs together. But your theology should be a joyful response to what Christ has done for us and what God has revealed.
Yeah. Any other input on just a good book? Yeah, back there and back. Good book or good practice, whatever.
It's kind of an alternative. I work with teenagers, but if you're looking for some deeper theology that you can put in their ears, there's a rapper named Shai Lin who has these 2 albums called Lyrical Theology. The first one is Theology, the second is Doxology, including titles such as The Hypostatic Union. And you can put it in their ears. You never knew it existed, just to let you know.
You know, we did know actually that it existed, and in fact, as we closed the service today, Jerry's going to do a liturgical dance to that rap.
Yeah.
And it's I guarantee it'll be the high point of this whole event.
Is it time? Come on out, Shylin. Come on out.
All right, I'm going to roll us on to the last part, the last question, and we're thinking long-range hopes and goals for the Theological Task Force. And in reality, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jerry, I know you will, if I get this wrong, but there's a theological task force. There always has been since the very beginning of this discussion and dialogue as things started moving into eco. But the plan is to form 2 task forces, kind of joined almost. You almost, it's a cell that's kind of split but joined. Because we have common tasks, there's common interests, we have a common tradition. We're all Presbyterian, all Reformed, all evangelical within that. But ECO obviously has some tasks they got to work on. It's really those tasks are largely irrelevant to the fellowship PCUSA side of things. The confessional standards is a huge project ECO really has to figure out, and vitally important. But again, there's no way that the fellowship side is going to change the Book of Confessions for the PCUSA or any time soon. So 2 different projects. So I think the idea is to have 2 separate task forces, that right, one for ECO, one for the fellowship. But we don't want to use the words, and I'm trying to think of a better word. We're not separating the task force and all of the work of the task force and making them utterly independent and divorced from one another. Somehow we want to have mutual collaboration, working together while one is working on the specific projects and needs in front of them and the other is doing the same, and yet coming together joyfully and creatively thinking, what can we do together? And so that might look like something like this, that there has to be, as I mentioned, and it has been mentioned before, the issue of ECO's confessional standards. That may go through the grassroots of the presbytery, sending up motions. It might be a direction from the task force down to the presbytery and say, hey, would you look at these 10 questions and answer them in all of the presbyteries regarding the confessional standard? It could be anything. And they're going to be working on that. Meanwhile, fellowship might be working on, I can't really speak to this or no, but suppose how is the PCUSA, how is the confession fellowship side of the church going to wrestle with Belhar? How are you going to live that new creed into the Book of Order, and what is it going to mean to you? How are you going to address it if it comes up on the floor of presbytery? That might be something you talk about, ponder. But while those 2 task forces are working on those 2 such areas as those, we might also say we want to meet in a year and have a real theological conference, and we're going to talk about the sacraments, or we're going to talk about the meaning, power of grace. And what does grace mean in our churches? How do we teach it? How do we preach it? How have we misunderstood? It could be grace. It could be something that might sound esoteric, but is vitally important. Say the ascension of Jesus. And we focus so much on his cross and resurrection, but the ascension is just as important as the cross and resurrection. He's ascended to glory and reigns. But what does that mean in the daily life and mission of the church? So we might, as task forces, do separate work where it's needed and a united work for the good of the whole. And however big that whole is, may it include more than just PCUSA on that side and the fellowship, and ECO, may it include whomever would be fed and help. So that's one way that we see that. I wanted to lay it before we're going to come to you, and I'm going to give you the question that I'd like you to think about, and then we're going to have a couple on the panel speak to it before we hear from you. But the question I want to lay before you is this. If the theological task force or forces could provide something for you and your ministry and or your church and or your presbytery, they could give you something, lead you into something, write up something, provide something, what would be the singularly most helpful thing that the task forces could give or do for this next year in the life of the church? Okay? So think about that, and I'm going to turn David and Michael, they're going to start the sharing a little bit, and then we'll come back to you all.
I have the enviable task of asking questions of what a fellowship task force could or should look like. I'm not on the task force, so I've kind of thought back from the perspective of where we were in Minneapolis and where we were in our first Orlando meeting. And a lot of the things that I kept hearing, the purpose of the fellowship was, as best I can remember, twofold. The first was to help us maintain the relationships we already had so that those who were leaving the denomination going eco would be able to maintain an organic fellowship with those of us who were staying, right? The second one being that it would help us to maintain international relationships with other Reformed bodies who were breaking fellowship with the PCUSA in a way that some PCUSA churches could still maintain those relationships. The second thing I remember is that there was an intentional shift from trying to win votes, right, to now saying we have a new mission to build and nurture the ministries of these congregations and to provide the support networks for these pastors and that sort of thing. So in this context, the question, what should a theological task force look like? Or do we even need a theological task force, I think is appropriate to start asking. Could it be that perhaps like PFR used to have, we just have a theological consultant? It used to be Dick Ray, right? And so maybe is that what we need? Or do we need a whole body that we call a task force? And if so, what is the task force doing? And so I thought of three possibilities. The first one is that it actually is just continuing the ministry of PFR under another name. So now it's publishing theological material, reporting about theological events, holding theological conferences, seminary conferences, things that PFR did that were excellent. Maybe it's continuing that. The second thing is maybe it's actually there to maintain those ecumenical relationships at a theological level, i.e. to keep the eco task force from going way too crazy or something, right? Good luck. Or maybe other possible ecumenical goals. And then the third thing might be that it's just a standing committee of people who address issues ad hoc as they come to the fore in the denomination, or maybe within local congregations if you want to call somebody because you have a question, which might also work. And I suspect it's probably some combination of these things. Or is there something better? That's the real question. Is there some better purpose for having a theological task force? And if so, what is it?
From the eco side of it, I feel compelled to make it clear that eco does have a theology. The purpose of the theology task force from the eco side is not to develop what we already have. We have the scriptures, we have the deposit of faith in the form of the creeds and confessions, we have the essential tenets. The task before us is figuring out in a broad way what confessions and creeds we are going to claim as our own, and then shaping that deposit of faith into a lens through which we look at our life together and the task ahead of us. So we have some broad tasks, some urgent ones in terms of the confessions, but also some equally important but perhaps less urgent tasks in terms of developing material that will help congregations ask the right questions, which I think is very important. Developing that passion amongst pastors and elders and just folks in the pew over the confessions, and asking the question, which came up in my group a number of times, so what? What do we do with these confessions? Why should we spend time reading them? And we need to be able to answer that in a way that helps people engender the passion that my good brother Barry here has. How can we get excited about this? and what does it matter? And so I see, as part of the task force, I see us developing ways for congregations to explore those issues and answer those questions. And as we come together in conference and whatever that looks like, exploring some of those things together, having those the conferences be more than just asking questions, but also exploring sacraments, exploring our theological essentials, and just having a chance to do that. So I'm very excited about being a part of that and being able to work through that. I've been an ordained pastor almost half my life, and this is the first time I've ever been excited about being part of a denominational endeavor. So I'm quite thrilled with that. So going forward, what we're looking for, and I hope to be able to talk to some folks about this, is to provide some sort of clearinghouse on the internet where folks can ask questions, give ideas, things that we can use as we come together to chew on and figure out what it is that you all need most and what all you need most urgently. And for those of you who volunteered to help, I will be calling you.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to you. What if the task force could provide anything? Yeah, Joe.
So here we are at this whatever period of time this is, and the Anabaptists have always been essentially over and against culture, antagonistic culture. Christians are good, culture is bad, we're not like you. And the progressives have become basically apologists for whatever the culture's doing. And what I would like to see work done is, I love that we are in a post-Christian world. And this is a different world than Calvin and Luther lived in, because they were dealing with Catholicism and so forth in a bad time. What is the Reformed stance, or what are some words we can develop? What is the Reformed stance in a post-Christian world? And try to clearly articulate what that looks like. And that's what I'm always trying to figure out. And for me, I tend to focus it on, you've got the Galatian church with its legalism and fear, and then you've got the Corinthian church with its everything goes. And I would like any help I can get in clear articulation about we always say Christ transforming culture, like, neither against culture or capitulate to culture. Somebody to do some clear thinking on what that Reformed stance is. That goes deeper than any differences, eco, fellowship, whatever. I'd like somebody to give us some clear thoughts on what that looks like.
Good. All in favor of Jerry doing that, say aye. All right, so moved. Thanks, Jerry. That's really good. Yeah, right next to you. Great.
I wonder if the theologians could be, what do you call when you're asking questions all the time? An interlocutor, is that how you say that? What if you're a prophetic interlocutor, just saying, hey, you guys are out there innovating and doing that. Let me ask some questions about how does this fit with our understanding of the image of God, or understanding this theological concept, so that there was some good interaction, healthy continuity, discontinuity there. That would be my wonder.
So those two sound very much the same as what you're saying is with the culture. How can something speak into the culture? What does that cultural thing say to the theological? So that fits very well with what was just said. I think that's really good. Those are great ideas. And the other thing, I want to thank you. I went so fast to the joke on Jerry that, the beauty of that question or that idea is that that's a Christian issue of our age. That's not an eco problem. That's not a fellowship. That is a Christian. And I think the more we can do thinking like that, the better it is for the Lord's church. That it's not just about our little sect and part of the Lord's church, which is important. We have to come up with confessional standards for eco, but boy, if we could come up with good stuff. And we should be proud of the fact that we Presbyterians have been among the best in the last several hundred years of doing that, of putting the best, most wise counsel into the mix of culture of any. And we should be proud of that and fight to regain it. So good word. All right, others. Best thing we could offer or provide, or
I don't know if this resource already exists, but I could see my session using 3-4 minute videos based on certain topics. And I can see, well, my church is not in the fellowship. I can see that sort of tool being used on YouTube with ECO, with fellowship, to not only answer questions, but also create that kind of challenging environment theologically on a national scale using that sort of technology.
Great. Yeah. Very helpful, historical. Anyone else? I'm just writing. Yeah, Scott.
At the risk of beating a dead horse or being perceived as anxious, I do think that it would be helpful to pastors and sessions to have our theology folks give some leadership around a really positive, helpful, constructive pastoral approach to homosexuality and how that's playing out in our congregations. I feel like the negative side is pretty clear, but the positive side for evangelicals is not entirely clear how we actually go about thinking theologically in a more nuanced way than perhaps we have shown ourselves to be comfortable with. So I think that would be very helpful for many of our churches across.
Yeah, way broad.
Yeah.
Well, broad. Yeah, very good. Thanks, Scott. That's a good word. Yeah, Jeff.
This is a total minor thing, but if we could get the essential tenets numbered, like broken out by paragraph and number or whatever, it would just be easier to refer to which section to help as you're teaching people through it. So something that was like a church-wide universal numbering system, sort of like how the paragraphs are numbered in the Book of Confessions.
Okay. But no bold print, right?
I would be happy to have that removed, actually, but...
It's all bold. Yeah, or all bold. What do you think about that? Yeah. Mickey, did you have something you want to say?
Something just as an apology to continuously be redundant here, but it has to do with the passion concerning children and youth. And that is that if we as a group of believers, whether we're in the fellowship or eco churches, those of us who are trying to hold on to these biblical standards, the truth of Scripture, the essence of our confessions, if we are not teaching them effectively to our children and our youth, in 20 years, this denomination will be in the same deep doo-doo that the PCUSA is facing now, that we've had. We have to be doing it from the bottom up. So there was a suggestion even in our group that might there need to be a task force that just works on this educational piece, that does the things for the children and the youth, that would also provide methodologies for the andragogy as well as the pedagogy, so that we can have this. And if that needs to be a grassroots movement, I'll start it. You know, we just need to get this going, and we need to be doing it right so that we're not going to lose in the next 20 years another group of culturized children. And there is an effective way that's happening now that we are working on it, and we can make this work.
Good word.
That's
Thanks,
me.
Mickey. Yeah, good word.
I just wanted to say that I'm excited because I've met so many of you that are so passionate about the project that's before us. And it's not something that we need to fear or shirk back from, but it's something that we all realize this is, a portion of this is on me, that we are in this place and we have the ability to study and to think and to collaborate and to go and make this happen for our churches, for our children, for the next generation, for our believers in the pews now. This is like we say, you know, we need to confess this has been neglected, and we can go forward from here. And it's just been a pleasure, and I see great things happening. So many of you so passionate about these things, so ready to go. Don't just think it's going to be somebody else or wait for somebody else to do it. Keep working to connect and do these things.
Great. Thanks. Anyone else on the ideas of which you'd love if the task forces could provide, give, contribute anything? Anyone else want to add anything? Kent is my associate. Makes me a little nervous.
It's not directed at you.
Oh, good.
One of the things having worked in a lot of different churches, because I've done 7 or 8 interims, is many of our churches have children's workers and youth workers who have no theological education. And we're expecting them to teach the creeds and the confessions. So I would propose that one of the things we think about is that we have a gathering of those kinds of people where we can talk about how, what they are and how they can be used in their various ministries.
Amen.
Great. Thanks,
Amen.
Ken. Very good word. All right. Yeah, we even got somebody that's willing to lead it. Pardon?
Yes. Yes. No, not something that
Accessible.
costs them a lot of money. We just need to get them in the regional. Yeah, I'm all over it. Exactly. We need to go to the cloud on so many of these things, and social media.
Yeah. Back
cloud,
to the
the
ascension
ascension,
on
yeah.
the cloud. Yeah, very good. I think that's what the Lord wants us to do. All right, I'm going to take the authority of ending this a little bit earlier for grace and for weariness. So I want to thank you very much. It has been very helpful. And if you got other ideas, forward them up to us. They don't have to come to you right now. If they come to you this week or this month and you got some brilliant ideas, or you may or may not know if they're brilliant, but you just say, I think it would help me if. We'd love to hear it. We don't want to do any of this in isolation, as Jerry began this whole thing. It cannot be done in isolation. And the goal of this whole thing is we're in it together. It needs to come, as the Lord has been pushing it from the grassroots. We need to have an energy from the floors of the presbytery. There also needs to be leadership from the top. Say, here's some direction, some wisdom, some questions you all should be thinking, and then resources that we can provide, often together. And you all might have resources. If somebody might have a new members class, it's the best way it's ever been done. Share it with the family. When we can borrow and such from each other, it makes the whole church stronger and better. But we're in it together. So I'm going to turn it over to Jerry as a closing. And thank you, team. I'm very grateful for your help. Good team. Thank you.
5 quick words. First was thank you to this team of 13 who worked with you in small groups, met last night, worked again today, presented this, and they still got some more work to do, and that is to produce some summary that's of help to the task force, that is some record of what took place here. And we are very grateful. So again, if you would thank them. I think we just had a conference. At a conference, people confer. We bear the burden together of whatever lays before us in terms of opportunities and challenges and obstacles, and we've done that. We were not a deliberative assembly. We were a conferring one, and we conferred. The back and forth. You were ready for it. You were glad for it. It would have failed if asked questions you didn't, and offered to ask questions you failed. So thank you for participating in all of this. One word just for the moment about the 2 and the 1 and all that stuff. Going forward, there will be 2 task force, and they will each have a separate membership list. To the extent that ECO needs its freedom to call it as they see it, and to exercise the freedom that they have won, that needs to be granted. And those of us on the fellowship side are not to hear that as a distancing technique or somehow a critique of everybody that they've ever been in fellowship with. We have to be, people need to act in trustworthy ways, and we need to be trusting. And to the extent that we in the fellowship will cling and continue a deep, profound hope that we can continue to walk together, those of us who began and have such a long history with each other for the length of our lives, and have hopes for a continued partnership, that this is not some desperate act on our part meant to save us from all the things that ill us, and that ECO need to hear that as an earnest plea for a continued theological friendship. There is official language. Welcome to the world of denominations, but there's already official language for this, and that is that 2 task force, once having been joint, will work together when mutually beneficial. We think that's a lot, if not most of the time. We love the idea that this conference did what it was supposed to do. It gives every evidence of that to me. We were to confer, we were to launch, we were to set the grammar and the vocabulary, frame the tasks that are before us, have a significant conferring time that helps us to understand the issues, not to have resolved them, but to understand the issues and to give us some strength in going forward. Yes, in identifying resources, primarily of which is that we are stewards of a legacy in which those who have lived and died the faith before us have not done so in vain, but with a gift to us. And part of that is a written record of their confession of Christ in their generation that helps us read the scriptures by which life does come to us. And we are grateful for that. I'm grateful for your affirmation of it. There are other tasks ahead of us as well. How we will go about that, simply, I don't know. But I'm unafraid of this common future. I want to remind you that these confessions that we are affirming and reaffirming, many of them were written in two-party systems, where Scott Presbyterians and English Puritans got together and wrote Westminster. They were not the same thing. And they were going to have different futures, and they knew it. And they really liked the idea that they were not locked into the same polity with one another. Yet, Westminster has blessed millions of Presbyterian people through the last 3 centuries. Whatever it was that Nicaea was about, it wasn't about uniformity. It really wasn't. There were at least 5 primacies, and they felt no particular deference to one another. That was painfully clear to those present and those who read that history. Yet look at the work that they did that becomes the statement of a common faith for the faithful since then. That we are two is not to be a fearsome thing. That we can be together is a possible thing, and we will work toward that. So thank you is the final word for coming, for sharing, for being straightforward in small groups and in the plenary sessions, for enduring, what was it, 1 million words have come at you in the last 24 hours. And thanks for memorizing them all and taking them all back with you. I appreciate that. May I pray? Again, for all that led up to this, even if our memories were perfect, we couldn't recount it because we missed some of our own history because you were at work and we didn't see it. For all that will come from this, well, we're guessing. And we're trusting. So for this moment in our common life, we give you thanks. For those that led, for those that followed, for those that spoke, for those that listened, for those that were ready, for those that are now ready. For all this we give you thanks in Christ. May we confess him. Amen.